Thomas! Percy! James! Gordon! Henry! Edward! 16! Wilbur! Birdie the bus! Terrence the tractor! Finally, Topham Hatt. Morning on the island of Sodor, Thomas, Percy, and James were feeling shocked and curious. "I heard there's a new visitor visiting our island today," said Thomas. "Yeah, me too," agreed Edward. "I wonder who it could be," asked James. Just then, the visitor jumped onto the island. It was a giant evil spaceman. When the spaceman saw Percy, James, and Thomas, he said, "Well, what do you know? I got 3 engines to knock off the tracks." So, he kicked Thomas, Percy, and James right off the rails. "Ah!" cried Thomas. "It's the new visitor!" cried Percy. "He's trying to get us off the tracks!" wailed James. "Who had caused the disturbance and confusion and delay," said Sir Topham Hatt when he heard what had happened. But the spaceman ignored Sir Topham Hatt and kicked him right out of his way. And the spaceman saw Gordon and Henry. Then he decided to pick them up in his hands. "Hey, get us down," he said. "Never! I will keep you in my hands," said the giant. "You have been a bad giant," called Sir Topham Hatt. "Put Henry and Gordon down and return to the sea, or my engines will run over your foot." "Never!" said the giant, and he ran off to carry Gordon and Henry all around the island of Sodor. "I'll save you, Gordon and Henry," called James, and he hit the giant's foot over and over again. "Ow, that hurts," said the giant, and he kicked James right out of his way, and he threw Gordon and Henry in the air. All the engines were stacked up on top of each other in a very cool shed called a jumbo room, where engines, coaches, and freight cars can be stacked up on top of each other with the help of a giant crane. Suddenly, when the giant spaceman saw the jumbo room, he thought it looked stupid and decided to kick the engines right out of it. "Grrr!" he growled as he walked over to it. The engines were feeling scared when they saw him. Then the giant started to kick. Engines fell everywhere. Then the giant spaceman jumped on top of them and stomped on everyone. Then he threw them into the air. First, he picked up James and threw him in the air. "Oh! I hope it didn't scratch my red paint," said James. Then the spaceman picked up Stephanie and threw him as well. Stephanie fell down with a bump on James's boiler. "Watch the boiler," said James. "It's not my fault," said Stephanie. Then the spaceman threw Toby in the air. "Oh! I think my bill's broken," said Toby. And finally, he picked up Donald and Douglas and threw them in the air. Oh! Oh dear, it groaned. Edward was so scared, he raced off to get away from the spaceman. But he got stuck in the tunnel, and he couldn't get out. Then the spaceman saw Edward stuck in the tunnel. Now's my chance to get Edward, he whispered. So he ran to the tunnel and kicked every engine who was in his way. I got you now, Edward, he called. Then he removed the tunnel off of Edward and threw him high into the sky. Whee! Oh! Oh, my boiler, wailed Edward. Hey, bellowed Sir Topham Hatt. You can't treat my engines like that. I don't think so, said the spaceman, and he threw Sir Topham Hatt in the air too. Oh! Oh, I got a headache, wailed Sir Topham Hatt. City of Tunin arrived with the breakdown train to get Edward and the rest of the engines back on track. But the breakdown train broke down. Sorry, called City of Tunin's driver, but the breakdown train has broken down. What? Broken down? Wailed, cried City of Tunin. No! Then he ended up racing around, knocking some of the hurt engines everywhere. If the breakdown train is broken down, he cried, we can't get everyone back on track. Don't worry, said his fireman. We'll send it to Crew where they'll fix it. So they went to Crew to fix the breakdown train. But then the spaceman saw what was happening. Oh, no, you don't, he yelled, and he threw the breakdown train into the air. Oh! Bad giant, said Sir Topham Hatt. Nobody calls me bad, said the giant. Then he started running around the place for exercise. I'm free, he said as he jumped in the air. Wah! Splash! But the giant tripped over James the Red Engine, and he splashed into the sea forever and ever and ever. Hooray! Cried the engines. I'm glad he tripped over me by mistake, said James. And finally, as the giant's lion sank into the bottom, the city of Tunin took the breakdown train and Crew, and they fixed it, and they all got ready to get all engines back on the track to fix up the yacht. One night on the island of Sodor, all the engines had gathered up the yard. Gordon, the big engine, was going to tell a ghost story. It's called The Smelted Ghost, said Gordon. Ooh, said Oliver. That sounds scary. It does indeed, agreed Percy. Once upon a time, began Gordon, there was a small tank engine. He had to work at the smelter. He was forced to go to the smelters to collect some scrapped girders to take to the scrap yard, but he took the wrong way. Suddenly, a claw grabbed him and dropped him in the smelting machine. Then they smelted him. But he has been returned from the dead as a rusty old smelted ghost. And they say every night the smelted ghost puffs around the smelter's yard looking for the way out. Then Sir Topham Hatt came. "James and Edward," he said, "you must go get some steel girders from the scrap yard and take them to the harbor." Edward and James were shocked. "Yes, sir," they said. "I hope the smelted ghost doesn't catch them," said Thomas. And they puffed away to the smelters. They got to the smelters. When they got to the smelters, James and Edward were feeling scared. "It's nighttime," said Edward, "so that means the smelted ghost could find the way out. I hope he doesn't catch us and turn us into rusty pieces of scrap," said James. Then Edward bumped into a truck. Boom! And a giant piece of tart fell right on top of him. "Ah! James! Help!" he cried. When James heard Edward's cry, he came over to find him. But the only thing he saw was a big white ghost. "Woo!" cried James. "I gotta get out of here!" "James! James!" called Edward. And he raced after him. James raced out of the smelters as fast as he can, and Edward raced after him, and the tart wouldn't blow right off. And James raced past the engines. "Run, race for your lives, everyone!" he shouted. "It's the smelted ghost!" Then Edward came in, and the tart blew right off of him. "That's not a ghost," said Toby. "That's just Edward," said Mavis. James came back and noticed his mistake. "So you were the ghost engine," he said. "I got covered in tart," said Edward. "Oh," said James. "I guess we've forgotten all about that there are no such thing as ghosts," said Duck. "I think you're right, Duck," said Gordon. "But there is definitely no such thing as a smelted ghost engine." And everyone agreed that there were no... "Guess what?" cried James excitedly one day. "What?" said Gordon. "There's a new engine visiting the island of Sodor today. His name is Lord Harry. He's visiting for a week, and I get to be the very first engine to meet him." "That's great," said Henry. "But you better be on your way if you want to meet Lord Harry," said Gordon. "Certainly," he agreed James, and he puffed off to find Lord Harry. Lord Harry was on a siding, thinking of all the engines who lived on the island of Sodor, till James came up. "Hello," said James. "Hello there," said Lord Harry. "You must be James." "Of course I am," said James. "I want to show you the wonderful places on the island of Sodor." James showed Lord Harry all the wonderful sights of Sodor. First, James showed Lord Harry the seaside. Then James showed Lord Harry the viaduct. And finally, James showed Lord Harry the train yard, where there were lots and lots of freight cars. It even had the breakdown train. That night at the sheds, James decided to sleep next to Lord Harry. All the engines thought Lord Harry was a wonderful engine. "I never met an engine who has purple paint," said Henry. "Neither did I," said Gordon. "Lord Harry is so great," said Thomas. "I wonder where he came from," asked Percy. The next morning, Lord Harry and James wanted to work together, and Sir Topham had agreed. First, James and Lord Harry shunted freight cars in the train yard. I think the train yard is my favorite place on this island, said Lord Harry. I'm glad it's your favorite place on Sodor, said James. Then both engines took up children to the seaside for a wonderful vacation from school. James and Lord Harry even helped the bigger engines around. Finally, James told Lord Harry about the time he had a terrible accident with freight cars. Next day, Lord Harry decided to tell James about how his home, where he lived. I had this friend, said Lord Harry. He said, his name was Coldy. Coldy? Asked James. Yes, said Lord Harry. He was a good friend. I'll tell you about him. Sometimes we have to do nothing but pull some dirty, dusty freight cars. Very favorite job was to pull passengers, and we had faces at the back of us, so that it would be very easy to pull passengers backwards. Even try pulling freight and passengers at the same time with just one coach and only one freight car. Next morning, it was Lord Harry's last day at the island of Sodor, and it was almost time for him to go home. He knew he was gonna miss James, but he couldn't wait to see his friend again. I'm gonna miss you, James, said Lord Harry. Me too, said James. Then Sir Topham Hatt came. It's time to go home, Lord Harry, he called. Your friend is waiting for you. I thought I would never see Coldy ever again, said Lord Harry. So he said goodbye to James and all the other engines, and he puffed away. James was feeling sad. His face turned blue as the sky. Don't cry, James, said Edward. Maybe next month both Lord Harry and Coldy could probably visit our island again. And maybe you'll know who Coldy is, said Toby. I really like Lord Harry anyway, said Thomas. Me too, said Gordon and Henry. All together. And all the engines hoped that Lord Harry would come back for it. Arthur often gets the toughest jobs in the world, but he is very, very careful not to get into an accident because he had a spotless record. Nobody ruins my spotless record, said Arthur. But when he said that, it reminded him about the time Thomas was ruining his spotless record when he took a train going through to market. Then Thomas met Arthur. Hello, Arthur, said Thomas. How's your spotless record? It's just an ordinary fine job, said Arthur. Then he thought of what Thomas would look like if he had a spotless record just like him. Would you like me to show you how to be careful not to get into an accident and have a spotless record like me? He asked. Of course, agreed Thomas. So the next day, Thomas was taking some freight cars to the coal yard. He was trying extra hard not to get into an accident, but the freight cars were being naughty. So when Thomas arrived at the coal yard, he tried to puff away after one of the freight cars was loaded with coal. But Thomas's wheels just slipped on the tracks. Hold back, hold back, hold back. teased the freight cars. Come along, said Thomas. We won't, rumbled the freight cars. Be patient, Thomas, called Arthur from behind. But I can't pull the freight cars out of the coal yard, said Thomas. Here, let me help you, said Arthur, as he buckled up to the freight cars. Oh, no, sobbed the freight cars. Hold back. But Arthur didn't listen. Thanks for pushing me from behind, called Thomas. That afternoon, Arthur showed Thomas how to shunt coaches into the correct way. And Thomas did. Soon, the coaches were shunted in the right place. Thanks for the help, Arthur, said Thomas. Proud, he raced off with the coaches without a word. Careful, Thomas, called Arthur. You don't want to cause confusion and delay. But Thomas wasn't listening. And Thomas came onto a bridge. This puffed down from the hit bridge. He puffed onto a twisty track. Oh dear, moaned Thomas. What's happening to me? Thomas was so dizzy, he didn't see that the switch had switched him right off the main line. And there was trouble ahead. Percy was filling his bunker with coal at the watering coal station. His driver applied the brakes, but it was too late. When Thomas bumped into Percy, coal spilled all over his boiler. Oh no, coughed Thomas. I ruined my chance to not have an accident and have a spotless record. You pushed me out of the hopper, scolded Percy. Then Arthur puffed up and noticed what had happened. Thomas, he scolded, what have you done? I think I got too excited and shot forward with the coaches, said Thomas. Sir Topham had understood what ended when he heard what Thomas said. I know Thomas had a spotless record, he said, but you're not where he came from. I think you're right, sir, said Thomas. Me too, said Percy. 3, said Arthur. After that, Thomas shunted the coaches back to the coachyard and had a good wash down. And then Arthur decided to work with Thomas all day long just in case he had another accident. And he was right. Devious Diesel was a diesel who always hates freight cars. Sometimes he has a bad attitude. One day, he was waiting for Toby the tram engine to take him to the repair yard. He had an oil leak and rusty old axles. As he waited, he talked to Wilbert and Caldy. I'm being sent to the repair yard, he said, and you're not. We know, said Wilbert. I have an oil leak, continued Diesel. And you steamies can't have oil leaks. That's because you're a diesel, said Wilbert. Steamies don't have oil leaks, said Caldy. Besides, they don't run on oil, they run on coal. Well, said Diesel. I heard that steamies are also known as stinky steamies. And a stinky tram steamy is taking me to the scrapyard, and Thomas just told me that diesels are dirty diesels. Last, Toby the tram engine arrived. As he was being taken away to the repair yard, he was ruder than ever. "Steamies are no good," he grumbled. "Turn 'em in diesels." At last, Toby and Diesel arrived at the repair yard, and Diesel was back on track from the breakdown train. "At last," he grumbled. "The journey is over with a stinky steamy, and I'm glad it's over." "So am I," said Toby, and he puffed away. Soon, Toby arrived at the water tower to fill up with more water till Mavis arrived. "Hello, Toby," said Mavis. "How you doing today?" "Not very good," said Toby. "Diesel has been rude to me all day. I took him to the repair yard." "Just do what I do when someone has been rude to me all day," said Mavis. "What's that?" asked Toby. "Just ignore him and show him what it's like to be rude," answered Mavis, and Toby agreed. After Diesel had been repaired and oiled, he was talking to City of Tunin until Mavis came up. What do you think of that, Mavis?" he called as he honked his horn. But Mavis didn't talk to him, and she trundled away. "You're just being an ignorer," rumbled Diesel. Later that day, there was bad news in the coal yard. "There are way too many freight cars," said the yard manager, "and they're all blocking the line. What are we going to do?" "I know," said Diesel. "Let's shunt them into a very long train." And so they did, but it took a really long time. And Diesel knew it too. At last, all of the freight cars were lined up and coupled together in a very, very long freight train. Later that day, Duncan was taking a coach back to the coach yard after taking some children to school. But he had to go through the coal yard to get to the coach yard. And he was on the same track as the freight train. The signalman didn't know that either. "That's good," said Duncan. "We don't have to stop." But Duncan didn't saw the freight train until it was too late. "Orders!" yelled Duncan as he came off the rails. Luckily, no one was hurt, but Duncan's driver and fireman had jumped clear, and freight cars were piled up on top of him. And it took a very, very long time to put the freight cars and Duncan back on the track. At last, the freight cars were all cleaned up. "Glad that's over," said Duncan. "Wow, wow, wow." Then, after that, Diesel had another plan. He found a shiny new coach from the coach yard, and he pushed it onto Thomas's branch line. Then James noticed that Diesel was blocking the track with the coach. "Get out of the way," he called. "Thomas is due with Annie and Clarabelle." "He can wait, bossy boiler," interrupted Diesel. Thomas was racing down his branch line with Annie and Clarabelle. James and Diesel watched as Thomas didn't see the coach until it was too late. The coach flew into the air, crashed into the ground with a bang. Thomas was frightened. "Now what will Sir Topham Hatt say?" he groaned. He found out for sure. "I'm sorry about the coach, sir," said Thomas sadly. "Don't worry, Thomas," said Sir Topham Hatt. It wasn't your fault. It was Diesel's fault. He caused confusion and delay, and I'm gonna force him to stay in the shed and never ever do that ever again. Now you must get to Wellsworth Station with Annie and Clarabelle." "Yes, sir," said Thomas, and he puffed away. Sir Topham had forced Diesel to stay in the shed all day long. Then Mavis and Toby became, "Well, Diesel," they said, "it looks like you've learned your lesson. You should never ever do anything like that," said Mavis. Or be rude or have a bad attitude," said Toby. "I know," rumbled Diesel. "And Sir Topham has told me to stay in the shed and never ever came up with plans like that, or I'm not allowed to go visit the island of Sodor again." So Diesel never ever had a bad attitude ever again. Terence the tractor loved working in his field. He doesn't care if he doesn't have much to do, but it was where he and his driver made a wonderful vegetable flower for garden. "Hello, Terence," said Henry. "I like your field. It's better than my shape." "Why, thank you," said Terence. Then Henry noticed Terence's caterpillars, but he never saw them before. "Your wheels look weird," said Henry. "They're not wheels," said Terence. "They're caterpillars. Caterpillars are help tractors and bulldozers go everywhere." Just then 16, the troublesome engine, puffed up to them. "Be careful, little Terence," he said. "You don't want your field to be all crooked, do you?" "Of course not," said Terence. "I can't have a crooked field. I have to make it nice and straight." Henry never talked to 16 in a long time before, so he puffed away as fast as he could. "Goodbye, Terence," called 16 as he puffed away. Percy and Wilbur loved working together. They had been great friends ever since the first time they met each other. But that made 16 very jealous. "I remember the very first time I met Percy," said Wilbert. "We had been shunting freight cars and coaches and helped the bigger engines around. And now we loved working together." "I know," rumbled 16, "but I think it should have been me who should have been working with you all the time." "Well," said Wilbert, "maybe someday you can work with me and Percy, but sometimes I call me and Percy the happy little chaps." Henry puffed rudely to them. "What's that, Wilbert?" he said. "You and Percy are happy little chaps? What are you going to do now? Pull the mail train together? Don't let that troublesome engine make fun of you." "His name is 16 and he didn't," rumbled Wilbur. "He and I are," at last, Henry lost patience. "I don't care if you're friends with him," he said. "I'm just friends with James and Gordon." The next day, Henry the Green Engine had to work at the wharf, where James and Thomas worked. "Welcome to the wharf," said James and Thomas, "where we all work." "It's where you can meet narrow-gauge engines," said Thomas. "And you can talk to them and sometimes be next to them," said James. "I think you'll love working here," said Renes and Scarloli. "We're always seeing Thomas and James," said Duncan and Rusty. The wharf was crowded, and Percy the small engine was busy taking 2 freight cars full of coal to the coal yard to get back to Wilbur. "Mind your tenders and back, bunkers," he called. Then there was trouble. One of the freight cars came beyond a bend, tipped off the track, and broke open. "Oops," said Percy. The wind came. The coal dust floated around Thomas. "Oh no," cried Thomas. "It's going to get me all dirty." But he was wrong. Coal dust floated around James. "Not my red paint," he wailed. When the coal dust floated around on Henry, it fell all over his boiler. "Float off! Float off!" hissed Henry. But the coal dust didn't flew off. "It's no use," said Henry's driver. "We have to find a way to get that coal dust off." Tried everything to get rid of the coal dust. First they spun around and around on a turntable, but the moving air didn't make the coal dust fly off. They tried smoking it off, but the smoke made Henry's boiler dirtier than ever. They tried washing the coal dust off, but it took a very long time to give Henry a wash down. "It's no use," said Henry's driver. "We're going to have to go back to the engine shed and find another way to get the coal dust off." Henry was worried. He thought that everyone should tease him. But when they got to the sheds, it was empty. But the wind blew, and the coal dust flew right off and fell onto the ground. "That was lucky," said Henry's fireman. "Guess we should have mentioned the wind," said his driver. Henry was glad, and he was proud the coal dust was off his boiler. Finally, the next day, Henry puffed off to work with Percy, Wilbur, and 16, and he didn't act rude anymore. And puffed sadly to Edward's station. "It's not fair," he complained. "Diesel has been telling lies about me and made Sir Topham Hatt and all the other engines think I'm horrid." Edward smiled. "I know you aren't, and so does Sir Topham Hatt," he said. "You wait and see. Why don't you help me with these cars?" Duck felt happier with Edward, sent to work at once. The cars were silly, heavy, and noisy. The two engines had to work hard, pushing and pulling all afternoon. At last, they reached the top of the hill. "Goodbye," whistled Duck, and rode gently over the crossing to the other line. Duck loved coasting down the hill, running easily with the wind whistling past. Suddenly, it was a conductor's warning whistle. "Hurrah, hurrah, hurrah!" laughed the cars. "Broken away! We've broken away! Chase him! Bump him! Throw him off the rails!" they yelled. "Hurry, Duck! Hurry!" said the driver. They raced to Redwood Station, but the freight cars were catching up. "Fast as we can, then they'll catch us Grantley." The driver was getting control. "Another clear mile and we'll do it." "Oh, glory, look at that!" James was just pulling out of their line from the station ahead. Any minute there could be a crash. "It's up to you now, Duck," cried the driver. Duck put every ounce of weight and steam against the cars. "It's too late," Duck groaned and shut his eyes. He veered into a siding where a barber had set it up a shop. He was shaving a customer. the silly cars that knocked their conductor off his van and left him far behind after he had whistled a warning. But the cars didn't care. They were feeling very pleased with themselves. "Beg pardon, sir," gasped Duck. "Excuse my interruption." "No, I won't," said the barber. "You frighten my customers. I'll teach you." And he lathered Duck's face all over. "Port, I do not like engines popping through my walls," foamed the barber. "I appreciate your feelings," said Sir Topham Hatt, "but you must know that this engine and his crew have prevented a serious accident. It was a very close, shave." "Oh," said the barber. "Oh, excuse me." He filled a basin of water to wash Duck's face. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you were being a brave engine." "That's all right, sir. I didn't know that either." "You were very brave indeed," said Sir Topham Hatt. "I'm proud of you, and it's not your fault. It's the freight car's fault." Sir Topham Hatt watched the rescue operation. Then he had more news for Duck. "And when you are properly washed and mended, you are coming home." "Home, sir? Do you mean the yard?" "Of course." "But, sir, they don't like me. They like Diesel." "Not now. I never believed Diesel, so I sent him packing. The engines are sorry, and they want you back." A few days later, when he came home, there was a really rousing welcome for Duck, the Great Western Engine. Every engine loved doing their everyday jobs. Sometimes they have to do different kinds of jobs, but they still love doing their everyday jobs. And it was a beautiful spring morning on the island of Sodor. All the engines were very busy. They did their everyday jobs all the time. Everyone was happy and very proud. Well, not everybody. Oliver, the Great Western Engine, wasn't feeling very pleased. "Gee," he said, "every engine has a very cool job. Thomas pulls passengers with Annie and Clarabelle. James pulls passengers or freight. Edward's the back engine. Gordon pulls the express. And Mavis works at the quarry. But I always work with Toad the freight van, with freight or passengers. And I never work with anyone. Ever." Then Oliver's driver came. "It's time to go work with Toad the brake van," he said. "He's waiting in the train yard." That evening, Oliver arrived back at the sheds to sleep with every engine. He slept between Henry and James. Even City of Truro slept with them. Everyone told about their everyday jobs that they did today, except for Oliver. Next morning, the firelighter came early and lit a fire in Oliver's cab. Oliver woke up. "Good morning," he said to James. But James and the rest of the engines were still asleep. Oliver was furious. He thought that the engines were ignoring him because he didn't told them about his everyday job. So he blew a very loud peep to wake everyone up. Everybody woke up. "What was that?" said Gordon. Morning already? Said Percy. Hmm? What's all the commotion? Yawned Mavis. You woke every engine, said James. Sorry, said Oliver. After that, when all the engines went off to do their everyday jobs, Oliver had to, do lots and lots of jobs. First, he shunted coaches from one place to another. Then, he pulled freight cars everywhere around the island with towed the brake van. And he had a goods train. He had to take it to the other side of the side of the island. It was a very long way. Every time Oliver stops to take a rest, his driver tells him to go do another job. Later that day, 16 broke down, and Oliver had to use the breakdown train to take him to the repair yard. Hurry up, Oliver! Shouted 16. It should be the breakdown train who should be hurrying up. Not me, said Oliver. At last, 16 was on the breakdown train, but he lost patience. Being a troublesome engine is no good, he shouted as he puffed. He got carried off. When the work was done, Oliver talked to tow the brake van. I'm tired of all this work, said Oliver. You know, Oliver, said Toad, it's okay if it happens, but you always work with me. I know, said Oliver, but I don't work with anyone else but you. At last, Oliver arrived back at the sheds. His axles were aching, and his bumpers were hurting in his front. I'm tired of being a busy Western engine, said Oliver. So he made a plan. He waited until his driver and fireman came out of his cab for a break. At last, Oliver's driver and fireman were taking a break and were talking to each other. Now's my chance to run away, whispered Oliver. And before something else would happen, and while his driver and fireman were not looking, he puffed away as quickly as he could. Then he decided to say goodbye to everything on the island. Goodbye, breakdown train. Goodbye, coaches. Goodbye, freight cars. And goodbye, Chinese dragon. Oliver was too sad to say goodbye to Toad. When Oliver was completely out of the island, he puffed into an old siding. It had not been used in a long time. This is my new home, said Oliver to himself. Meanwhile, all the engines were in the sheds. Then they noticed that Oliver was missing. They were amazed and puzzled. Where's Oliver? Asked Henry. He always sleeps between me and Henry, said James. Where could he be? Asked Edward. I'll go get Sir Topham Hatt, said Gordon. He'll know what to do. Gordon came back with Sir Topham Hatt. Oliver is missing, he said. We have to find him tomorrow. But where will he sleep? Asked Percy. I don't know, said Sir Topham Hatt. The next day, all the engines were ready to find Oliver the Great Western Engine. Donald and Douglas searched the harbor. Edward and James searched in the forest. Gordon and Henry searched high up on the viaduct. Percy and Thomas searched Brendam Docks. And Mavis and the city of Truro searched from station to station, but nobody found Oliver. So all of the engines and Sir Topham Hatt searched everywhere on Sodor, even 16 and Wilbert. 16 told Wilbur of how Oliver took him to the repair yard on the breakdown train. They found Oliver on a siding. "Yay!" they cried. "We found Oliver!" Oliver got frightened. "Hey, you found me!" he cried. "Of course we did," said Edward. "We need you to come home," said Percy. "Why'd you run away like that?" said Mavis. "Because," said Oliver, "I've been a busy Western engine all day yesterday. Hey, and I'm sick of it." "It's okay if you're too busy, said Wilbur. "Yeah, said James. "What makes you think that?" "Because," answered Oliver, "I never worked with anyone else but towed the brake van." "Sure you have," said Percy. "Remember the time how you helped me and Duck shunt coaches and pull freight? That was working with somebody else." "I get it now," said Oliver. "I have been working with somebody else besides Toad." "Then you'll come home with us?" asked Mavis. "Can you, please?" asked 16 and Wilbert. "Yes, sirree," said Oliver. "I've learned my lesson." So everybody went back home, and nobody ever ran away from the island ever again. Can you guess why? One night on the island of Sodor, James's driver said, "We have to get up early tomorrow morning." Sir Topham Hatt was just thinking that since you're Nick's traffic engine, and you can pull freight and passengers, he was thinking that you could pull passengers and freight at the same time. If we're up early enough, we'll be right on time and really reliable. And if we are, Sir Topham Hatt will award you with a brand new dome color. Instead of brass, it'll be shiny as gold. "Hooray!" cried James. "That would be wonderful." And when he fell asleep, he dreamt of what it'd be like to have a gold sparkly dome. Next morning at 6 o'clock, James was excited. He couldn't wait. So when his driver and fireman came, he puffed away as quickly as he could. When James arrived at the station, there were 2 shiny new coaches and 3 freight cars full of coal. James was excited. He couldn't wait. And you know why. James backed up to the coaches and the freight cars. He didn't want to be late. "Hurry!" cried James. "I want to get my dome color." "First," said James's fireman, "we have to take the passengers to the village. Then we have to take the freight cars to the coal yard." "Yes, sir," said James. It wasn't long till the passengers were on board and the coal was loaded. The guard peeked out, blew his whistle and waved his green flag, and James was ready to go. Come along, don't play tricks, puffed James to the coaches in the freight cars. But they weren't sure. Or, we don't like freight cars, said the coaches. We don't like coaches, said the freight cars. Don't care, said James. Clouds of smoke and steam billowed from James's funnel as they puffed down the main line. Hurry, puffed James excitedly. They were going well, just like what happened when James pulled coaches or freight cars, and there were green signal lights everywhere. Then they approached Gordon's Hill. It grew steeper and steeper, but James wanted his dome to be sparkly gold. As they came down the hill, James applied the brakes. Well done, James, said the driver. Off we go! But they were going too quickly when they reached the bottom, and they didn't know that the signal was broken, and the switch had switched them right off the main line. James popped slowly against the switch. A Chinese dragon was in the siding that James was racing onto, and the station master and the conductor were looking at it. They were planning to do something with it. This will be perfect for a carnival, said the station master. Or maybe, said the conductor, when it's spooky and scary enough, it'll be perfect for Halloween. They were so busy planning, they didn't see James heading straight towards the dragon. Oh no! Cried James when he saw the dragon. His driver and fireman applied the brakes, but it was too late. James's driver and fireman had jumped clear before the crash, but the Chinese dragon was crushed. Henry the Green Engine arrived with the breakdown train. Then Sir Topham Hatt came to see him. I'm sorry about the Chinese dragon, sir, he wailed. Cheer up, James, said Sir Topham Hatt. It wasn't your fault. A broken signal and switch points caused the accident. As soon as you're back on the track, you're going to the paint shop. That's where you'll get your new dome color. Henry will take your train for you, and we'll make a brand new Chinese dragon. Won't that be nice? Yes, sir! Cried James excitedly. He was so excited his boiler tingled. James sure is excited, said Henry. James liked being at the painting shop, but was glad to come home. His dome was sparkly and twinkly as gold. When engines and people saw James, they cheered for him and his new dome. Beep, beep, whistled James. Thank you very much. Everyone liked James's dome now. They liked it so much, Thomas and Percy were jealous. But that's another story. Percy and Thomas spoke rudely at James. Why should James get a new dome color? They asked. I think it should be us. We like James with his brass dome. James felt sad when he heard what they said. Don't worry, James, said Edward, kindly. They're just jealous. Besides, what could go wrong? Later that day, James had to work with Duck, the Western engine. Hello, James, said Duck. I like your dome. It's better than ever before. Thank you, Duck, said James. James told Look what Thomas and Percy said. They're very jealous, he said, but Edward was kind to me. Suddenly they heard something. It was Percy and Thomas. What is with them? Said James. I don't know, said Duck. But they don't sound like that. Duck and James did notice that Percy and Thomas were teaching him a lesson. So they blew their whistles loudly every time. Thomas and Percy couldn't stop. Sir Topham Hatt came to see him. Stop that right now, he bellowed, and get your whistles fixed. The two engines puffed sadly away. Two workmen and banged on their whistles until, well, they stopped, not blowing loudly. Later, in the sheds, their whistles were back to normal. Glad we're done teaching James a lesson, they said. We were feeling uncomfortable. So you were teaching me a lesson, said James. Yes, we were, said Thomas and Percy. We were too jealous. It's okay to be jealous, said Edward. Yeah, said Gordon and Henry. Promise you won't do that? Yes, said Oliver. Yes, said Thomas and Percy. Then I think it will never happen again, said Oliver. Nope, said Thomas. We like our whistles better, and we're never doing it again. It was a beautiful summer morning on the island of Sodor. Gordon, the big engine, was feeling very excited. Sir Topham Hatt told him to go to the harbor to pick up a special and take it to the dairy factory. Gordon was on his way to the harbor till he was surprised to see Thomas talking to Annie and Clarabelle. What do you think you're doing, Thomas? He asked. You should have gone off to work. I know, said Thomas. I'm telling Annie and Clarabelle what Sir Topham had told me to do. This is no time for talking, said Gordon. If you end up talking, then you won't be very useful, and Sir Topham Hatt will not like it at all. Now I have to pick up a very special, and I'm very excited. Spoiler, said Thomas. Gordon arrived back at the harbor. It was dairy day. Workmen were busy delivering some milk and dairy from faraway lands. The milk and dairy was loaded on big cargo ships. Gordon watched as workmen and cranes filled his freight cars with milk, cheese, butter, and yogurt. And he sent it off to the dairy factory. Thomas was backing up by pushing freight cars from siding to siding to let the other engines through. The station master arrived with bad news. What happened? Asked Thomas's driver. Gordon ran out of water and coal, and now he needs help. Thomas puffed off to the rescue. Thomas found Gordon stuck on the main line. Thomas thought it was funny. Got yourself broken down, eh, Gordon? He teased. I guess you're not very useful anymore. Be quiet, said Gordon. It's not nice to tease someone like that. You're talking in your bossy way again, said Thomas. That's enough now, Thomas, said his driver. We have to take the dairy to the dairy factory. Can you push those freight cars, please? Of course I can, said Thomas. I'm an expert at pushing and pulling. Gordon angrily watched as the freight cars were coupled in front of Thomas. Off we go, said Thomas. I'm gonna have to get there quickly to get there on time. Goodbye, Gordon. Be careful, Thomas, said the driver. But Thomas was in a hurry. He couldn't see ahead, so he didn't see that the switch had failed and he had been diverted into a siding. Look out, Thomas! Yelled the driver and applied the brakes. But it was too late! The driver and fireman had jumped clear, but spoiled milk and squashed dairy squirted all over Thomas. Sir Topham Hatt came to see him. Thomas, he said, you have spoiled our dairy and caused confusion and delay. Sorry, sir, said Thomas sadly. We must deliver some more dairy and find someone else who'll take it. And Thomas puffed sadly away. That night in the sheds, Gordon and Thomas told everyone what had happened. At last, Edward the Blue Engine spoke. You know, he said, it seems to me that we learned 2 lessons today. What did we learn? Asked Percy. Number 1, began Edward, never tease someone. And number 2, please do not go too fast. That's when you can't see ahead. All the engines agreed, even Gordon and Thomas. I'm sorry I've been bossy to you, said Gordon. And I'm sorry I teased you, said Thomas. And nobody else was teased or bossed ever again. Dun 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 dun. Dun 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 dun.